Hello everyone. Every early February, the German press painfully revisits the Sittensen Massacre. What's striking is that nearly 20 years have passed enough time for a newborn baby to grow up. So why is Germany still unable to forget a case like this? The answer lies in the perpetrator's brutality and cold-bloodedness, and in the death toll, 7 victims. And for Vietnamese people, this case carries another meaning no less painful. All 5 perpetrators were Vietnamese. So how did it happen? And nearly 20 years later, what became of those criminals? Right now, Vietnamese Case Files will walk with you step by step to find the answers. Please note that all content in today's video has been researched and compiled by our team from multiple sources. If there are any inaccuracies or details that need correction, please leave a comment below so we can update and revise them. If today's case is chilling enough to give you goosebumps, don't watch it alone. Share it with your friends to follow along. And remember to subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you can continue exploring other gripping cases. Now, let's enter today's story. On the night of the 5th of February, 2007, a 47-year-old man drove to the Lin Yue restaurant in the town of Sittensen to pick up his wife, a waitress there, because it was already past closing time and she still hadn't come home. But the moment he stepped inside, he froze. His wife, along with several others, lay collapsed in pools of blood. In total panic, he fumbled to call the police. Within half an hour, local investigators arrived at the restaurant. Special units moved in with extreme caution because no one yet knew whether the perpetrator was still hiding inside or had already left. The 3-story building served both as a restaurant and as the owner's residence, with multiple interconnected rooms that formed a maze dangerous for anyone entering for the first time. In an atmosphere thick with the stench of death, officers swept the ground floor and then slowly climbed the stairs toward the living quarters above, nerves stretched taut. Fortunately, the urgent search found no sign of any suspect. All that remained was a terrifying silence and the victims. Under flashlight beams scanning every corner, police gradually discovered a total of 6 bodies scattered across the restaurant area and rooms on the first floor. 3 were men and 3 were women, all showing no signs of life. One additional man still had a faint pulse and was rushed for emergency treatment, but he later died as well. Most disturbingly, the victims' bodies were found tightly bound with plastic zip ties. The gunshot wounds showed the marks of a cold, close-range execution, leaving most of the victims' faces badly disfigured. Notably, some bodies also had pink fabric wrapped tightly around their heads. Later, forensic analysis determined it was restaurant tablecloth material, likely used by the killers to muffle the sound of the shots or to reduce blood spatter in the surrounding area. Beneath that layer of fabric was a fatal wound at the back of the victim's head. This detail revealed the killer's chilling level of calculation. While police were still reeling, a man suddenly stepped out from the last room at the end of the ground floor hallway and said he was a tenant renting a room in the building. Remarkably, he was completely unharmed and he hadn't even realized a tragedy had just unfolded right next door. When questioned, the man said that night he had shut his door tightly and was wearing headphones while playing video games, so he did not hear any unusual sounds. Perhaps because of that, the perpetrators assumed the room was empty and left it alone. Around the same time, a faint, muffled cry was heard, leading officers to the cashier area near the entrance. There, forensic staff were stunned to find a little girl, about 2 years old, trembling as she hid under a blood-stained blanket. Miraculously, she was not injured. Police suspected that before she was attacked, the child's mother may have managed to wrap her daughter in the blanket and hide her near the counter, hoping to keep her out of the killer's sight. Thanks to that act, the child survived. With such a chaotic scene, identifying the victims became the top priority in order to trace the perpetrators. Through the statement of the husband who had come to pick up his wife, police quickly obtained preliminary information. Among those killed were the owners of Lin Yue restaurant Danny Fan and his wife Annie Fan. Both were of Chinese origin, born in Hong Kong in the 1970s and 1980s. Carrying the dream of building a life abroad, the young couple married and migrated to Germany in the late 1990s. In December 1997, they officially opened Lin Yue, a Chinese restaurant located at No. 6 Hamburger Street in the town of Sittensen. Thanks to their cooking skills and warm hospitality, the fans quickly built a strong reputation locally. Their life in Germany seemed complete when, in 2004, they welcomed their first daughter. Beyond the tragedy of the restaurant owners, the 5 other employees who died were also Asian immigrants who had come to Germany to make a living. One of them was Nguyen Thi Ngoc Oanh, the Vietnamese waitress whose husband arrived to pick her up. Oanh was born in 1968 and had been working in Germany for 6 years. At the time of the crime, she had only been employed at Lin Yue for a short period. On that fateful night, because she stayed behind to clean up with the owners and co-workers, Oanh tragically became a victim of the brutal crime, when sudden and unjust death delivered a devastating psychological shock to her husband in a foreign land. The second Vietnamese victim was identified as Dao Ngoc Son, 32 years old, originally from Haiphong. When authorities reached the scene, he was found in the food storage room, barely clinging to life. Although he was rushed for emergency treatment immediately, his injuries were too severe, and he died later that same day. One important detail provided by Oanh's family was that although Son had lived in Germany for 10 years, he did not have official residency papers and was therefore forced to use someone else's identity to work. This made the police's initial identification process significantly more difficult. For the Malaysian waitress Wai Heng Foong, 36 years old, her circumstances were also deeply tragic. She and her husband migrated to Germany in the early 2000 years to make a living, leaving their 2 young children back home in the care of relatives. The couple had not worked at Lin Yue for long before disaster struck. On that fateful night, Wai and Oanh were brutally attacked by the perpetrators right in the ground floor dining area. The next victim was Rohasit Jitlod, 31 years old, who worked as a kitchen assistant. He was born in Thailand but moved to Germany with his mother and German adoptive father when he was 6. Records showed that Rohasit had a relatively solid background. He graduated from Hochschule, completed military service in Germany, and was even a formally trained artist. His body was found near the kitchen with multiple gunshot wounds to his back and head. Based on the scene, police believed he likely tried to run, but was shot from behind and collapsed on the spot. The final victim on this tragic list was the chef Wan Wong Lee, 57 years old, a longtime close acquaintance of the restaurant-owning couple. Wan was deeply loved by his colleagues and had been planning to retire and return to his hometown of Hong Kong. But the tragedy struck just before he could fulfill that dream. The victims' deaths left not only immeasurable pain for their families and loved ones, but also plunged the entire town of Sittensen into shock and mourning. As soon as rescue operations were completed, Sittensen police immediately formed a special task force, devoting all resources to investigating this shocking mass killing. The first clues collected at the chaotic scene were scattered. Crucial traces such as blood, spent shell casings, bullet impacts in the walls, and numerous fingerprints and shoe prints appearing across multiple areas. Based on ballistic evidence, the weapon was identified as a small caliber handgun fitted with a suppressor. The fact that the perpetrators fired at close range was precisely why the sound was significantly reduced, drawing little attention from nearby people. After thorough forensic processing, investigators gradually formed a key hypothesis. The motive pointed more toward robbery than personal revenge. This assessment came from the discovery that valuable items at the restaurant had vanished, including cash, a laptop, and mobile phones. These were compact items that could be easily carried off and quickly sold. Logically, if the attack had been purely for revenge, the perpetrators would typically leave immediately after killing, rather than risk staying behind to loot property. From witness statements, police learned that on the evening of the 4th of February 2007, Lin Yue served customers until around 10:30 Pessants when the last guests left. After the doors closed, only the fan couple and 5 employees remained inside to clean up and prepare for the next business day. One notable detail was that shortly before the tragedy, specifically at 10:20 p parade, the owner, Annie Fan, was still on the phone with a regular customer, asking him to help check a corrupted music file on the computer. That customer was a tech specialist and kindly stopped by to take the data home to fix it. However, when he called back at 11:20 p.m. to report the result, no one answered on the other end. This crucial detail suggested that only minutes after the last customer left, Lin Yue restaurant had already become the target of a deadly attack. While the investigation was under intense pressure, an unexpected call from a police department near the city of Bremen delivered extremely valuable leads, unlocking a key turning point in the entire case. According to a report from patrol officers, they had just stopped a dark blue car carrying 2 Asian men. The stop took place at around 1 p.m. on the 5th of February, only 13 hours after the horrific murders. Notably, the 2 men showed multiple suspicious signs. One could not produce a driver's license, and in his pocket, officers found a large quantity of illegal drugs along with a wad of cash worth several thousand euros. The other man was carrying a similarly large amount of money. Suspecting a drug trafficking or theft ring, police decided to search their Volkswagen Polo. And then, in the cup holder beside the driver's seat, officers found an unusual slip of paper. Before police could open it, one of the 2 men lunged forward, snatched the paper, crumpled it, and tried to dispose of it. That suspicious move, combined with the statewide alert that had just been issued for the Sittensen Massacre, suspects led officers to detain both men. When the paper was recovered and unfolded, every officer present was stunned. On it was the scribbled word Sittensen, a misspelling of Sittensen, along with the exact address of Lin Yue restaurant and an unfamiliar phone number. Even more alarming, the paper included a sketch later confirmed to be a floor plan outline of the restaurant, with room locations marked in striking detail. With so many overlapping coincidences, Bremen police immediately grew suspicious. They sent a coordination request to their colleagues in Sittensen at once. The 2 suspects were quickly transported to headquarters for interrogation and forensic examination of their bodies and clothing. The preliminary check brought a shocking discovery. Specialists found traces of human blood still stuck under the sole of one suspect's shoe. Subsequent DNA analysis confirmed that the blood sample matched one of the victims from Lin Yue restaurant. It didn't stop there. Comparison results showed that an unknown fingerprint recovered at the scene also matched the fingerprint of one of the 2 men who had just been arrested. The final piece of evidence came from the testimony of an elderly woman living near the crime scene. She confirmed that on the night of the 4th of February, she had seen a blue Polo circling around Lin Yue restaurant with 2 Asian men sitting inside. This ironclad chain of evidence left the entire task force bursting with emotion. So, after only half a day groping in the dark, investigators managed to capture the perpetrators behind the horrific massacre. On the evening of the 5th of February, 2007, emergency arrest warrants were executed on the 2 suspects. After a quick verification process, their identities were announced. Both were Vietnamese men residing in Germany. However, investigators raised a major question. Could just these 2 men really have carried out a massacre of such scale? As expected, later findings showed they were operating as part of a 5-member criminal group. The Sittensen task force immediately shifted direction, focusing all efforts on hunting down the remaining pieces of the gang. Over the following days, a series of rapid investigative measures were deployed. During urgent searches of the 2 suspects' residences, authorities seized suspicious items such as watches, jewelry, and several pieces of clothing stained with blood. By extracting phone data and GPS location information from the 2 men already in custody, police traced the identities of 3 additional accomplices in the same network. The suspect group consisted of 5 men in total, all Vietnamese immigrants in Germany, ranging in age from 25 to 42. Among them, authorities identified 2 sets of biological brothers and 1 man who had once been a former employee of Lin Yue restaurant. Notably, 3 of the 5 suspects had prior convictions and were already known faces to local police. That detail partly explained the reckless brutality of their method. An international wanted notice was immediately issued through Interpol to prevent the suspects from fleeing beyond Germany's borders. As a result, the remaining 3 accomplices were captured one after another in different locations. The manhunt officially ended on the 27th of June, 2007, when the final suspect was arrested in Hamburg. But the investigation did not stop there. The focus now shifted to clarifying each individual's role and strengthening the evidentiary file for prosecution. Yet one major obstacle confronted investigators: the suspect's stubborn, coordinated silence. It was not until early 2008 that one of the 5 suspects chose to cooperate with prosecutors, providing information about each person's role in the group. The details in his statement matched the forensic evidence collected, becoming the key factor that finally broke the defendant's silence. All 5 suspects in the Sittensen Massacre were Vietnamese male nationals who had lived in Germany for many years. Although their backgrounds differed, they shared one common point. Each had been involved in smaller illegal activities at some point in the past. Among them, the two principal figures were the Dao brothers, Dao Chomp-Zeung, 35 years old, and Dao Cao-Feng, 31 years old. Both were born in northern Vietnam and migrated to Germany in the 1990s. There, the two brothers scraped by through small trading and odd jobs, with highly unstable income. According to people who knew them, the brothers had sharply contrasting personalities. While the older brother, Dao Chomp-Zeung, was withdrawn and kept to himself, Dao Cao-Feng was socially active, deeply drawn to gambling, and had been entangled with illegal drugs and mounting debts. Investigators determined that Feng was the one who directly pulled the trigger, taking the lives of 7 victims. At the time of the crime, tests showed illegal substances in his system, so it is likely that Feng carried out this brutal act while not fully lucid. As for Chomp-Zeung, although he did not fire the gun himself, he actively participated in restraining the victims, thereby enabling his younger brother to commit the killings. The next 2 suspects on the list were also a pair of brothers, Vu Van Hiep, around 28 years old, and Vu Van Phuong, 25 years old. They were said to be distant relatives of the Dao brothers and moved within the Vietnamese community in Hamburg. Notably, Vu Van Hiep had previously worked as a kitchen assistant at Linh U and was fairly close to the restaurant-owning couple. So even after he quit, he still knew the daily schedule and routines there in detail. For that reason, Hiep was identified as the one who provided inside information so the group could plan the robbery. Meanwhile, Vu Van Phuong worked as a delivery driver in Hamburg and knew the roads well. On the night of the incident, Phuong was assigned to drive and keep watch outside. The blue Polo was the vehicle the Vu brothers had borrowed from an acquaintance as their getaway car after the crime. The final piece of the gang was Nguyen Quoc Tang, 42 years old. He was the oldest in the group and had also worked as a kitchen assistant at Linh U for a few months before quitting prior to the killings. Thanks to that brief period, Then learned valuable details such as the owner's habit of keeping money in a safe upstairs and the restaurant's weekend operating routine. Ten was also the last suspect to be arrested, after police gathered enough evidence to expose his hidden role. After piecing together all the evidence, investigators concluded that the gang had no personal grudge against the owners or the victims. The motive behind their actions was purely greed. Their target was Linh U, because 2 of them had once worked there and knew the owners often kept large amounts of cash on the premises. This enraged police, because instead of feeling gratitude toward people who had once sheltered and helped them in a foreign land, the 2 former employees recruited others and betrayed the restaurant owners in the most brutal way possible. Based on the reconstructed case file, on the evening of the 4th of February, 2007, all 5 men gathered to discuss a detailed robbery plan. Each member's role was clearly assigned. Zeung, Feng, and Hiep would break in and enter. Phuong would drive, act as lookout, and support the escape, while Then would monitor the situation from a distance. A little after 10 p, the group began assembling near the restaurant. At 11:03 pp, they broke in through the back entrance. The 3 men quickly took control, used zip ties to bind the victims' hands, and seized all phones and wallets to cut off communication. In the chaos, the head chef Wan Wang Li briefly escaped notice and hid in the kitchen area. Under the gang's threats, the owners Danny and Annie Phan were forced to lead them to the office on the 1st floor. There, after emptying the safe, Hiep immediately went back downstairs. As tensions peaked, Danny suddenly fought back fiercely, and during the struggle, Fong's face was exposed. Fong became instantly violent, struck him with a stick, and then coldly shot and killed the owner on the spot. Witnessing this, Wan tried to flee but could not escape the fatal shots fired by Fong. In a split second, what had begun as a robbery escalated into a horrific massacre. Immediately afterward, the perpetrators forced the remaining victims to kneel in the dining room. Zeung wrapped tablecloth fabric around the victims' heads, then had Fong methodically execute them one by one. After killing everyone and eliminating all witnesses, the 3 perpetrators checked the scene again, gathered the valuables, and left Linh U at 9 minutes past midnight on the 5th of February. Phuong then drove the Volkswagen Polo and fled with the entire group along the Amut motorway toward Hamburg. They believed the plan had gone smoothly, but they never imagined that just over a dozen hours later, their monstrous crime would be dragged into the light. The trial of the perpetrators in the Linh U massacre officially began on the 27th of August, 2007, just over half a year after the shocking took place. The 5 Vietnamese defendants were brought to court to face a series of serious charges, including premeditated murder, armed robbery, and other related offenses. After more than a year of proceedings and dozens of intense hearings, the court issued its harshest ruling on the 13th of May, 2009. The two main perpetrators, Dao Kaofeng, 31 years old, and Dao Chongzung, 35 years old, were sentenced to life imprisonment. This was also the maximum penalty under German law. The remaining three accomplices received substantial sentences as well. Vu Van Hiep was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Vu Van Phuong received 4 years and 9 months. And Nguyen Quoc Thanh was sentenced to 5 years for being an accomplice to armed robbery and for inciting the crime. These verdicts were widely supported by the German public. The victims' families who attended the trial could not hold back their tears after hearing the sentences, viewing them as the final measure of justice for their lost loved ones. The Lin Yue restaurant case ended with strict punishment for the perpetrators, yet its aftermath lingered for a long time in German society and within immigrant communities. Every early February, the German press would again recall the Sittensen Massacre as a horrific memory that refused to fade. As for Lin Yue restaurant, the site of the tragedy, it never reopened to customers. The address became a haunting symbol, left vacant for many years because no one had the courage to do business on ground so saturated with grief. Only nearly 10 years later was the building transferred to a new owner and renovated, gradually erasing the dark traces of the past. One notable incident occurred in July 2014, when Vu Van Hiep, one of the 5 perpetrators, was featured by celebrity chef Stefan Hensler on the television program Hensler Behind Bars, a show that teaches cooking skills to prisoners to help them reintegrate into society after release. But the program quickly faced a storm of backlash. One politician even called for the show to be taken off the air, calling Hiep's appearance a public exhibition of a hardened criminal. However, the RTL television network Ostlebenshuisen Prison and the Bremen Ministry of Justice later defended the program, arguing that it fulfilled a social duty by demonstrating the transparency of the criminal justice system. The incident also left an unintended somber note for the Vietnamese community in Germany. Vietnamese immigrants, long known for being hardworking and diligent, suddenly had to endure prejudiced looks because of the brutal actions of a single criminal group. What do you think about the perpetrator's motive in this horrific case? Leave a comment below so we can discuss it together. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to share it with friends and hit like to support the team, and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you won't miss our next compelling crime files. See you in the next episode, where another mysterious case awaits its turn to be brought into the light.